Good evening, everyone. I am sincerely grateful for your attendance here this evening at the launch of the Two Sisters campaign. When I was younger, I was often known as Zoe Duncan's little sister, an endearing title I deeply miss hearing people say. Zoe and I were 5 years apart, but the age difference didn't distance us. We were outgoing, adventurous, happy, and innocently mischievous children. We had an innate ability to create our own fun, and we enjoyed embracing life from dawn till dusk. But we could argue. I have memories of Zoe chasing me out of the house after getting Zoe into trouble for something I had done, which was a common occurrence. I could be quite an annoying little sister. For example, I had convinced Mum and Dad that because I was the littlest in the family, I should only have to unpack the top shelf of the dishwasher because there are less items to unpack. My theory was my smaller size meant I should do smaller chores. As irritating as it was, Zoe often found these types of justifications hilarious because I could deliver them with great conviction at such a young age. The thing about sisters is, you can be tearing each other's room apart 1 minute and then be on the floor in fits of laughter the next. Our love for each other was, and always will be, infinite. When Zoe was 11, she was taken to hospital as a result of a severe asthma attack. She entered hospital as a bubbly little girl, albeit not well, but she came home an entirely different human. Zoe was raped by a doctor at the Launceston General Hospital in 2001. Technically, I should say allegedly. However, this word profoundly irritates me. The trauma of the abuse and the re-traumatisation of not being believed by LGH senior management, police, child and family services and other agencies left Zoe and my family feeling disempowered and isolated. When I was 6 years old, I promised Zoe that one day I would grow up and fix the world which had hurt her so badly. That little girl grew up, became a nurse and midwife, and is now fiercely determined to change the system from the inside out. Whilst at work one day, news had broken that many other children had been sexually abused at the Launceston General Hospital. It was heart-wrenching to hear over time so many others had suffered trauma in the Tasmanian health system, Tasmanian Education Department and the Tasmanian Youth Justice Service. In 2020, a courageous whistleblower, a New South Wales journalist and many brave survivors shared their story of institutional abuse with Camille Bianchi on the Nurse podcast. Collectively, these brave people ignited the process of change in government institutions, a pivotal moment in Tasmanian history. It is imperative we acknowledge the history of this country and how the past impacts our present, so we can enact meaningful change in the future. When the British government invaded sacred Aboriginal land, they tormented, murdered, raped, exploited, introduced disease, and endeavoured to strip a culture away from its people in order to dominate their land. The government then had the audacity to label this invasion as settlement, as if it were a peaceful agreement amongst two countries and cultures. Institutional abuse started at the invasion of this country, and it has continued ever since. Our generation needs to break the cycle. I will reiterate the famous saying, if not now, then when? If not us, then who? I started the Two Sisters campaign in honour of Zoe and every human being who has suffered tremendously at the hands of pedophiles and some within institutions who enabled heinous abuse, either as a result of incompetence or worse, perhaps consciously. Sadly, as children who have been sexually assaulted move through institutions and systems, they often experience secondary trauma as a result of ineffective reporting. For example, it was reported by Camille Bianchi on the Nurse podcast that at Ashley Youth Detention Centre, incident reports were written in pencil so that aspects of reports could be changed or eliminated prior to scanning the documents into database. At the LGH, incident reports can be edited, rejected, de-escalated by senior management. There is therefore little confidence in the integrity of the reporting process. Transparency in this process is essential. It is clearly evident there is underreporting of misconduct and concerning behaviour in government agencies. The critical question here is, why don't staff feel safe to report? I am honoured to work alongside many highly skilled and committed nurses and doctors who are equally as troubled as I am about how their workplace is managed. The time lapse between reporting and being believed can take decades, if it occurs at all. Many remain silent and bear the pain alone. Many victim survivors develop unrelenting post-traumatic stress, consistent self-harming, and have become suicidal. Tragically, many do suicide. Trauma-informed training needs to be mandatory in all government agencies. As Dr. Kathy Kesselman states, trauma-informed services do not re-traumatise or blame the victims for their efforts to manage their traumatic reactions, and they embrace a message of hope and optimism that recovery is possible. In trauma-informed services, trauma survivors are seen as unique individuals who have experienced extremely abnormal situations and have managed as best they could. Almost 2 million Australian adults have experienced at least one sexual assault by the age of 15. With a statistic as high as that, why are we as a society so ill-equipped to support people who are severely traumatised? People are yearning for institutional reform. A hierarchical culture which puts youth and patients at the bottom, public servants in the middle, and management at the top can perpetuate an oppressive culture, particularly if those at the top behave unethically. In healthcare, we talk about person-centred care, yet it is not always being honoured and upheld by the institution itself. This is distressing. Recently, in a meeting, senior management stated to me that the Two Sisters campaign is a conflict of interest, and I am responsible for creating public fear. My response to this comment was, the onus is not on me, but on the institution itself. The campaign is designed to support people who have suffered abuse. Surely this would align with the objectives of the hospital. If it does not, then perhaps senior management need to reflect on their roles. What are the aims of the Two Sisters campaign? We want to advocate to ingrain an institutional mantra of listen, believe, support, and report. The campaign wants to see mandatory trauma-informed training implemented across all government agencies. We urgently need to improve the reporting process in institutions. There needs to be a clear understanding as to who reports, to whom they report to, and what they need to report. The reporting and feedback mechanisms need to be transparent. Legally, staff in all government institutions are mandated to report sexual abuse. Those who might seek to suppress, bully, or threaten staff with adverse professional consequences must be brought to account. I recognise these are major aspirations, but can we afford to be complacent? Can institutions continue to sweep pedophilia under the rug, pretending it did not or does not occur? With community support, the Two Sisters campaign will do its utmost to ensure the objectives of the campaign are realised. Before I finish, there are a number of people I would like to acknowledge. Firstly, there are loved ones in this room this evening who have walked this 20-year journey with our family. Thank you for your enduring support. I want to thank Albert Van Zetten for offering to MC and Will Smith for speaking tonight. I am grateful for the Two Sisters board members who, when asked to participate, readily accepted the challenge. They are Sebastian Buscemi, Tim and Sharon O'Neill, Josh Van Zetten and Kylie Stubbs. Thank you to Cameron Jones for volunteering his time and resources to collate the Two Sisters film, and Claire Dykeman for implementing the Two Sisters website. The staff at the tail race for hosting this event. In terms of our family, 3 people walked into our lives at the beginning of 2020 and lit a candle of hope, and in the most caring manner shared Zoe's story. These 3 wonderful people are journalist Camille Bianchi and Emily Baker and lawyer Sebastian Buscemi. What a difference you have made to our lives. Which leads me to acknowledge how grateful we are that the Commission of Inquiry has been established. Last, but certainly not least, a huge thank you to Keely McMahon, Sam Leishman, and to many others for sharing their story and walking this journey with us. Thank you also, Sam and Keely, for coaching me and encouraging me in sharing Zoe's story on the film, which, when it works, you'll find out I found quite extremely difficult. So, people often say to survivors, "You are so brave in coming forward and sharing your story." Although that is true, I would not like to diminish the survivors who are quiet in their grief and trauma. Because what is brave? Google's definition of brave is the quality that allows someone to do things that are dangerous or frightening. To the people who don't feel comfortable sharing their story now, or potentially ever, you too are brave beyond belief, because you too survived. Glennon Doyle wrote in her book Untamed about what it truly means to be brave. These are her words. "We tell our children that brave means feeling afraid and doing it anyway. But is this the definition we want them to carry as they grow older? Brave does not mean feeling afraid and doing it anyway. Brave means living from the inside out. Brave means in every uncertain moment turning inward, feeling for the knowing and speaking it out loud. Since the knowing is specific, personal and ever-changing, so is the brave. Whether you are brave or not cannot be judged by people on the outside. Sometimes brave is loud and go for it. For others, it is quiet and wait for it. Both are brave." Glennon continues with saying, "Brave is not asking the crowd what is brave. Brave is deciding for oneself." Thank you.
Thank you very much, Amanda. And can I say, from getting to know you over the past years, it's been a truly not brave, but I would say it's strong character to be able to come out and do what you have done. And it's something that I think is very important, and I think we only got to look at other people in our community, Grace Tame, for example, that has come out. And to make stories, it really helps the rest of us to understand what does go on, because a lot of us don't know. And when we hear the stories, we can sympathise, but what we need to do, as you are doing, is take action. So thank you for that. Thank you for sharing your story. But now we're going to continue to move on with the program, and it is my real pleasure to introduce to you our next guest speaker. This man really needs no introduction. I've got to know Will quite a bit over the last year or two, and I found Will Smith to be absolutely an amazing, passionate man, a man that really wants to get out there, help people, and is prepared to do whatever it takes to help young people, particularly who are struggling, going through difficult times. So please give you a real warm welcome to Will Smith. Thank you, Will.
Some value. Launceston can turn on some beautiful nights. Picture the Royal Park with the views of the Tamar, late afternoon with the orange haze glowing behind the back of the West Tamar Hills. Despite the heavy late afternoon foot traffic, it actually becomes quite a reflective space. I often take kids in my program there for dinner, an ice cream or sometimes just a bike ride. Rewind 3 weeks and I'm describing a night where we did exactly that. It didn't take long before we sat on the grass, started eating our Dave's noodles and having a chat. These moments and views take a very quick back seat when a young person starts a conversation with, "Hey Will, I want to tell you something." Holding space for someone who discloses trauma is hard. But being the person who builds up the courage to fill that space for me is unimaginable. It was a little abnormal, but the following 5 days saw 3 young teenage boys in my program disclose that they had been raped and sexually assaulted during their younger years. It's a strange conversation to have because if we're completely honest, boys learn that we're supposed to be tough, strong and sexually dominant. It's the perception that carries weight across our society and in fact most cultures across the world. For these boys, it is utterly humiliating to describe how they were violated out loud. I find it difficult to understand the blowback of harassment and bullying that follows when they tell someone who isn't so believing or accommodating. What further concerns me is the impact that this blowback can have on a child or any person, in particular female victims of abuse. We see in our community here in Launceston, parents, students banding together to protect their team, their coach, their school, or disgracefully, even local real estate values against allegations of sexual behaviours. It has now come to light that government departments have been doing exactly that. But it's not only government departments. It seems that we have all become accustomed to protecting perpetrators or our own personal interests instead of listening to victims. As a result, it's now common for victims to remain silent even after being assaulted. With young men in my program, not only do they not want to speak about their groomer, friend or family member, but they often don't even know that they're victims. Victims of unimaginable violations and of crimes. No one's told them, and so as a society we've failed at being able to have that conversation. Until now. We're all uncomfortable, right? It's a difficult topic to speak of. When the Nurse podcast broke and information started to come to light, as a community we ducked. We didn't want to be seen as associating with people who are outspoken, people who are fighting against the system, or to be seen as rebels in a sensitive area of disclosures. Let's be real, Amanda Duncan should have been hailed a shining light in our community. And while many people held the flame, many others screened her phone calls. For me, tonight is not about the perpetrators of this type of offending. Tonight is about the shadow of protection that they are provided to carry out their crimes. We have weak legislation in our state that does not hold perpetrators properly accountable to their actions. A person with little criminal history is guaranteed to not receive a period of incarceration if they sexually assault a child. When I confronted one man whose victim refuses to go to the police, he described it as a one-off get-out-of-jail-free card. They know it, our kids know it, and for me, that is unacceptable. We've become accustomed to people in power and influence using ignorance or policy to protect them from their duty to hold people in their own departments accountable. A simple public apology is just not enough. Ignorance doesn't cut it for me when I'm consoling a young boy who has been raped for years by an older male who believes that he's protected by a broken system. The reality is, we can't change the past. A commission of inquiry will not mend the trauma or take back the actions that we so desperately hope that it will. What it will do, though, is it creates a conversation. We hope that it'll change policy and that it'll structure better outcomes. We hope that we can all grow, learn and build a better community because of it. But it does come at a price. The price of Zoe Duncan. The price of many people who live with the same trauma that Zoe did, or those who made the same decisions to end that trauma. The price is Amanda Duncan, someone who has to sacrifice time, money and emotional trauma just to be the forefront of this change. The price is our own egos, owning up that everyone in this room and those not present have all played a role in the problem, and we all need to start being part of the solution. In my role working with at-risk and vulnerable young people, it is clear that this solution needs to start coming into effect now. The Sentency Advisory Council has released a research paper only 2 days ago that suggested that a high number of our state's recidivist youth offenders have suffered trauma, including but not limited to abuse. All 3 boys that recently disclosed their rapes and sexual assaults to me were all active offenders in this community. However, I'm not standing here now with a pitchfork, ready to string up the head of the snake. Why? Because we all know the analogy of the scapegoat. We shouldn't be interested in apologies from people who now hold the broken pieces of a puzzle that they played no role in breaking. What we should be focused on is developing a whole of community approach in piecing it back together. Politicians who are in this room should be commended on being here. The politicians who aren't in this room need to take responsibility for their departments and find that point of accountability. Legislators in this room should be commended on being here. Legislators not in this room need to review and, if appropriate, make sentencing reforms that reflect our community expectations. Government employees need to take responsibility for their own complacency and neglect. Business owners need to develop policies and procedures that have protections for those that come forward. Friends, family members and general members of the community need to stop taking a step back. We need to start taking a step forward. Start a conversation, call out behaviours, stop turning a blind eye and start putting faith in those who are brave enough to make things happen. For me, I need to do the same. I need to train myself in continuing the conversation, to help others create spaces where young people feel comfortable to share their stories. I need to stop, reflect, and change my own mindset and perceptions of others who are being brave enough around me. We can all leave this event tonight and do something. That's my message. Do something. Forget your natural instincts to protect yourselves, our mates, our family, or even the unknown. Start being part of the change that offers support to people who have suffered trauma. Our community will be a better place for it. In our Western society, we have become accustomed to stepping back when perceived conflict or trauma is in front of us. Instead, we need to learn to step forward. In Africa, they describe this as Ubuntu, the belief in a universal bond of sharing that connects all of humanity. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Will. And you're right, it does take all of us to take action, but I want to really stress to the men in the room, we've got to be stronger and take action and be vocal in our groups, because it is largely a man's problem. So let's, men, from here on, do something. We did have a white ribbon event where we all came to UTAS Stadium, and I want to thank those men that did that, but we won't need more next time we do that. So keep that date in your mind whenever we do it next year. It's now my pleasure to invite a member of the board. Now, this lady probably doesn't need any introduction either, as Sharon O'Neill. She's a very passionate lady, a lady with a big heart, a lady who does a lot for our community, so please welcome Sharon O'Neill. Thank you.
Haven't we got some amazing young people, hey? I'm just so proud of Will and Amanda. I love watching 20-year-olds just when they refuse to accept the status quo and they take a risk and they get out there and they just have a go. And I love watching their successes. I also love watching their mistakes and the things that don't go as well as what they had hoped. Because I love that passion, that energy that they have. And I think our community is really, really lucky having such amazing young people in it who want to advocate for change. The sexual assault issue has been an issue that I have campaigned for as long as I trained as a social worker, and it was my passion when I came out of social work. I just couldn't understand how our community could be so riddled with sexual assault. And for me, it's kind of been decades now of campaigning, decades of listening to stories, decades of weeping with mums and children and adolescents, and it's just a heartbreaking issue. And for me, every election time that comes, I kind of go, oh, why can't we just solve this? Why can't we as a nation, why can't we as a state find the grunt to actually fix this issue once and for all? Why can't we have sufficient counselling? Why can't we have sufficient resources? Why can't we have sufficient education? Why can't we have, and the list goes on. And so tonight I'm not going to talk because I feel like Amanda and Will have probably expressed sufficiently what's on our hearts, but I am going to advocate for them. And I'm going to advocate for Amanda tonight because this costs. Like even putting on an event like this, it costs. There's a financial cost to this. Every time you advocate, there's a financial cost. Setting up the foundation costs. And at the moment, I am watching this beautiful young woman carry this cost emotionally, financially, and I'm in awe of her. But I also want to encourage you, tonight you can do something. Will kind of said we all need to do something, and tonight you can do something. There are QR codes on the tables. You can scan that and then you can go through and you can donate. Because we can continue to accumulate our resources, or we can allocate our resources. We can allocate our resources to actually be the change. We don't need politicians to do that. We don't need officials to do that. But every time that we allocate a resource to a cause like this, which is all about addressing sexual assault, we actually give it power, we give it strength, we give it energy. And so I just want to really encourage you tonight, not just to talk, because we've had a lot of hot air over the decades. I've heard a lot of hot air over the decades. But it's going to take resource, it's going to take community to come together to actually change this. So I'm just asking you tonight, can you please make a donation to the Two Sisters Foundation? I think we're going to have a little break in a minute, and whilst we're doing that, I'm just going to ask you to charge your glasses. There's some champagne glasses down there, and we've got some special Zoe champagne tonight, sparkling. So I'm just going to ask you to make sure in this break that you get a glass of that, because towards the end of the evening you're going to need that for a little toast. So, yeah, thank you.
It's really my pleasure now to introduce to Anne and Craig Duncan to you. For those of you that don't know, that's obviously Amanda and Zoe's mum and dad. They have obviously had a big part in this as well. They are here to share their part of the story and to do a toast together as a family, and then there will be that slide presentation that you can all watch, and from that we'll be able to conclude the evening. So it is a pleasure to welcome them and to trust that you'll all enjoy the story of Anne now sharing the story from her perspective of Zoe. Thank you.
Well, Sharon, I'm the only older person speaking this evening. Oh, yes, and Albert. Okay. Well, good evening, everyone. I just want to share a little bit of our experience with you. As you've already heard, 1 hour in May 2001 changed the course of Zoe and our lives forever. The laughter that echoed throughout our house from the joy of two sisters interacting ceased, but not indefinitely. Over the ensuing months and years, I looked into three sets of eyes. Zoe's distant and haunted, my husband's deeply saddened and troubled, and those of a little sister that were confused, lonely and lost. At times, this was unbearable. Our Zoe, even though physically present, seemed to disappear. I remember Zoe telling me Christmas was no longer a day to look forward to, but she would try to be happy for her sister's sake. We knew she smiled through birthdays just so her family wouldn't feel saddened. It took many years for family hugs to be meaningful again. And we recognise, Keely, that this may reflect Keely and Annette, that this may reflect the experience of many children who have experienced the trauma of sexual assault. Despite our best efforts to report and implement policy changes, particularly the chaperone policy, in the wake of Zoe's disclosures, nothing concrete eventuated. We kept the numerous documents and communications with various agencies as Zoe expressed a strong desire to advocate on behalf of others in this regard. She would often say, "I don't want this to happen to other people. I don't want this to happen to my friends." This file we kept became Zoe's property. We wanted her to be able to use this information sometime in the future, when there was a greater awareness sexual assault could occur in a hospital setting, or in fact, in any setting. We encouraged her to be patient and wait. The waiting is over. Our only regret is that Zoe did not live to see this day. Zoe had multiple health conditions, but rarely complained or spoke about them, and she didn't want us to speak about them either. She loved playing sport, but it held many challenges for her. For example, after hockey matches, and sometimes during the game, Zoe would often disappear behind the club rooms to disguise the fact that nausea had overwhelmed her, or that she was having an asthma attack that could then trigger a seizure. Zoe would then reappear as if nothing had occurred and put everyone else at ease with a warm smile. Nevertheless, 20 years after her sexual assault, we had not anticipated we would need to be Zoe's voice. To this end, Amanda has largely taken up the baton, setting up the Two Sisters campaign with the kind support of the board. Amanda will always have our strong support in this endeavour. If I may, I'd like to turn the clock back to speak of a poignant gesture made by a younger sister. At a young age, a very young age, Amanda perceptively recognised Zoe's affinity with nature and encouraged her during an extremely low period by placing a poem, and some might refer to this as a prayer, in a prominent position just above the toilet roll holder, in the hope Zoe would find some solace in its message. I hope you will indulge a mother for a brief moment as I read this poem to you. It's only a tiny rosebud, a flower of God's design, but I cannot unfold the petals with these clumsy hands of mine. The secret of unfolding flowers isn't known to such as I. God opens this flower so sweetly, while in my hands it would die. If I cannot unfold a rosebud, this flower of God's design, then how can I have the wisdom to unfold this life of mine? So I'll trust him for leading me every moment of the day. I will look to him for his guidance each step along the way. For the path that lies before me, only my Heavenly Father knows. I'll trust him to unfold each moment, just as he unfolds the rose. And we would like, as you leave this evening, Amanda would like you very much to each take a rose home with you. Thank you.
Thank you everyone for attending this evening. As you all know, as Albert pointed out before, today would be Zoe's 32nd birthday. Zoe was a lover of her birthday. She would always get very excited. And so even though I'm the one standing here tonight, Zoe is the one that went through 20 years of pain and suffering. So I'm regretful that she is not standing here tonight. So in remembrance of Zoe, we'll make a toast to her. Once Mum and Dad are organised. To Zoe Duncan, happy birthday, sissy.
Happy birthday, Zoe.
Thank you, everybody.